There is an old saying in woodworking that a poor craftsman blames his tools. For the most part, I agree with this. But when it comes time to start sawing, I think you could actually start to point a finger at the saw. If the saw is poorly tuned, it's really difficult to saw to a line, making you a poor craftsman, right? So maybe finally we found an area we can start blaming our tools. Well, yeah, maybe so. There is also the saying that a well-tuned tool, no matter the cost, is going to make you a good craftsman. So thanks to my friend Shawn Graham over at Wortheffort, he bought a $20 gents style dovetail saw. And he restored it, or should I say restored it, he tuned it, he really sharpened it. And he's got a great video on this showing just how simple it is to sharpen one of these saws. So this saw is now tuned up, and this saw is now tuned up, as is this saw. This is my favorite dovetail saw. So really now, finally, we're having an apples to apples comparison. Because really the number one thing when you start looking at premium tools, the big difference is it is sharp right out of the box. Chisels, planes, and especially saws. Actually, even more so saws. Chisels and planes, they all say you should do a little bit of honing first. Nobody says you need to hone a saw when you get it. This sucker is ready to work. So seeing that this has now been sharpened, it has been, the geometry of the teeth has been set to really my custom liking. I love having this custom saw sharpening thing. This is a great deal. But the geometry is now actually the same. The geometry on this Bad Axe stiletto saw has been changed slightly by myself over the years and is now exactly the same as what Shawn set this for. Now obviously there are some differences, right, that are going to make it saw a little faster. This is a 12-inch saw, this is an 8-inch saw. This is 15 points per inch and this is 18 points per inch. So just by the very nature of a smaller saw plate and smaller teeth, this guy is going to saw slower. But is the speed of the cut really all that's important when we're talking about a dovetail saw? And let me be very clear, we are specifically talking about dovetail saws here, because that's really the primary entry point for a lot of people wanting to get into hand tools. They want to hand cut their dovetails. And there's a lot of dovetail saws out on the market. A lot more of these economy dovetail saws in the market than there would be like economy tenon saws. In fact, there's really not a lot of those. So we are making sure this doesn't really apply to things like tenon saws. But when we're talking dovetail saws, well, handle, that's a big difference. I've got the pistol grip style handle that I prefer over this gent style handle that I really do not prefer. I've had some experience with this and a lot of experience with this. Is it a personal preference thing? I don't know, but we're going to now put these to the test and do our best to compare apples to apples. Now, as I said, this is my favorite dovetail saw, but it's got an unfair advantage being that it's a little bit longer and it's a little bit coarser pitched. So I figure I'll also throw into the mix this saw from BearKat that has the same 8-inch plate length and a similar tooth configuration, the fact that this is 18 points per inch and this is 16 points per inch. And this was actually due for sharpening, so I went in and I reset the geometry on this to match this saw. So let's talk about that first. The geometry on the saw, again, it's 18 points per inch. It has 5 degrees of rake angle, so it's relaxed just a little bit. And it's got 5 degrees-ish, a little less than 5 degrees of fleam on the teeth. Why is that my preferred sawtooth geometry for a dovetail saw? Well, most of the dovetails I cut are going to be in hardwoods. And even when they're in softwoods, they tend to be a little bit harder softwoods. So adding that little bit of rake, that 5 degrees of rake angle to the tooth, makes it a little bit easier to start the saw on hardwoods, but it also runs a little bit more efficiently in hardwoods, especially because for dovetails, I tend to be working with thinner stock. At most, I'm sawing, 3/4 inch thick for like a case side, maybe 7/8 of an inch thick for a case side, but most of my work, like 75% of it, is going to be in 1/2 inch thick or thinner for drawer sides, small boxes, things like that. So relaxing that rake a little bit makes it just less abrasive on the wood itself, makes it easier to start as well. The couple degrees of fleam is really for cleanliness of cut. The more fleam or angle across the teeth that you add, the more teeth go from acting like chisels to acting like knives. That fleam angle puts a point on the tooth and it will slice the wood a little bit more. This is specifically important on the back side of the saw cut. As you're sawing into the wood, you're getting a nice clean look on the face, but you could be getting a lot of tear out on the back. The more closer to knife edges that a slight bit of fleam creates causes an easing of the passage at the back of the wood, and you get a cleaner face on the back side. Certainly that knife edge also allows you to cut a little bit cleaner, and when you're dealing with very, very thin curves like we have with dovetail saws, that little bit of fleam just makes things a tiny bit easier. So it's a minor difference. It's something that I've come to over multiple years, that it's just the geometry that I like. So we know that geometry exists on this saw. The one toss-up between this saw and this saw is the set. Shawn did not reset this, but he did find that the set was particularly wide, so he stoned it. Now that lessened the set, but it also should have evened out the set a fair amount by just applying consistent stoning across the face. This saw has been set by myself, and I can tell you, having set it myself, it's set very consistently and very minimally. So that's the one thing that I can't really go apples to apples on this, but we'll talk about that as we start making cuts. Now, one particular point that I wanted to bring up about this saw, I talk about how, the difference with this $20 saw is that it comes pretty much dead dull, dirt dull out of the box. And I really recommend you go watch Shawn's video, because you get to see how long it took him to make a cut, to bottom out this cut to the back, and the difference in the number of cuts it made after he sharpened it. Moreover, it's not just sharpness in this case. The tooth geometry itself had to be completely changed. I was actually shocked at this. The geometry of this saw out of the bag, out of the box, was what we would refer to as a peg tooth geometry. In other words, it was a series of equilateral triangles. So the rake angle was equal to the angle on the back of the tooth, 60-degree little triangles all along the saw. Whereas a rip tooth saw, instead of it being this equal peg tooth, should be lined up so that the front face, the cutting face, is as close to 90 degrees as possible. So this really laid back geometry. Not only, even if the teeth were sharp, this would still saw really slowly because of so much rake. You're talking like 30 degrees of rake angle on here. I would not put that much rake on like my finest crosscut saw. So there is something to be said. Not only is it just about sharpening the saw, although one can make a case for shaping the teeth as part of sharpening, but this would be the fine-tuning part of things. This geometry had to be changed to even get close to playing with these boutique saws. So one of the warm-up exercises I like to call is actually sawing a whole bunch of lines. First thing I did was strike a baseline here. It doesn't matter the depth, but deeper than what your typical dovetail would be. And these half-inch boards, it would only be a half-inch baseline, and there's really not enough length of cut there to make any kind of difference. So I put a baseline in. This is probably about 1 1/4 inches long. And you could lay out like 10 lines on this board and saw 10 lines. But what I find even more helpful, rather than necessarily following lines that are on your board, is play a little drill where you split the board. So I'm going to draw one line on here that approximately cuts the board in half. And I've already failed because this is certainly wider than that. But what I want to do is make a saw curve that's half the width of the board, and then make a saw curve that's half the width of that and half the width of that. So now I've got the board cut into quarters. Then half the width and half the width and half the width, etc., until you're getting down to really tiny little slivers. And now you're having to navigate the distance between two saw curves. And this is really where you can start to test the metal of a saw. What is the set like? How accurately is it following? Is it pulling one way or another? And as you get narrow into those curves, if it's pulling one way or another, it's not going to be able to half the distance between the two of them. So let's give this a shot. Saw starts pretty easily. Okay, that busted through. Let's try it one more time. We'll call that user error the first time. Now, busted through again. So, right off the bat, I can see as I look closely here, each one of these cuts, and I'm not following a line here, they are drifting off to the left a little bit. And as you see, as I start to get closer, as I split and split and split, that saw cut drifted to the left and it actually made contact, releasing this little wedge because that saw was drifting ever so slightly to the left. And this is again why I say don't put lines on here. Just try to saw straight. You can do this again by actually placing lines and you can start to see how the saw is deviating. But with a small cut like this, a lot of times as you start to see the saw deviating for the line, the tendency, whether conscious or unconscious, will be to kind of try to steer the saw back into the cut, which is why, again, I find it's easier just to continue having the cut. Let's give it a shot over on this other board and see how we do. This one will be with the premium BearKat saw. Let's work on this side this time. Already I can see my lines are coming in straighter here. Now we're to the cut where the crown saw started to fail because it was drifting. So let's try this. See if I can't split it down the middle. Success. Can I do it again? I don't know. Saw kerf is bigger than I think what I'm trying to do here. Let's see if we can split this one more time. Almost. I got right down to the bottom before just the flexion of the wood. Is that a word? Flexion caused it to kind of drift and pop out. But you can see I was able to, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 halves before I had a breakthrough on there. While I'm still in on this tighter shot, let's flip these around and look at the backs of the boards. There's more fuzziness on the back of the crown saw board than there is on this BearKat board. Now, and I can definitely see that the kerf on the back side here is cleaner than it is on the back side there. Honestly, that's more of just an informational point because again, this is going to go to the inside of a drawer box or the inside of a case and it could also be very easily cleaned up. It's just one of those things that I like to point out because they did bring up the fact that a little bit of fleam does ease that cut. So more as a point of information, if you find that your dovetail saw is really ripping out the back of the board, add a little bit of fleam and it'll help ease that. In the case of this head-to-head comparison, I can't really deduct points from the crown saw for this because they both exhibited a little bit of tearing. I think what we're dealing with in this particular instance is the kerf itself is wider. I'm not going to measure this, but I can look at them with the naked eye and see that the kerf from the crown saw is probably about twice the width of the kerf on the BearKat saw. And I kind of suspected that going in because I know Shawn didn't actually like flatten this out and then reset. He stoned it, but it already had a pretty wide set. So again, that is not so much quality of steel or anything like that. It comes down to sharpening and tooth geometry. When you go to a boutique saw, you're going to find that the set is much more appropriate for the style of saw. A dovetail saw should have very, very little set, and it needs to be very consistent. The deviation that we saw on the crown saw drifting to the left is because of set. And I can tell you that because if I ever do drift, if I lose focus and my saw cuts drift, they always drift to the right for me. They always drift to the right for me. That's a body mechanics issue. My saw cuts never drift to the left, and this saw drifted to the left, which tells me the saw set itself was pushing it one way or another. So again, let's blame Shawn for that, for not going through the process of fully setting it. But if you just bought a saw and you've never sharpened a saw in your life, you're not going to know how to really set the saw well either. So there again, there is a representation of a cost difference. You can be certain that the saw is going to be set properly. And if you find the saw drifting one way or another, you need to send it back to that maker and they will fix it. So setup and sharpening is a major point of these saws. The next thing I will say, just from that initial cutting, is this saw was much less aggressive. And as I said, this has a slightly coarser pitch, but it's the same length of plate. But I find that that has to do pretty heavily with the saw. This gent style saw puts it very much in line, which can feel like you get a lot of control, but this one has a definite hang angle. The angle that you grab the saw and the angle of the back are not in line with one another like they are here. And that hang angle, I find, can add some aggression to this cut. I find like I've got a lot more control over the cut, and that may also account for my ability to saw a little bit straighter on this side. I could definitely feel that saw pulling, but you know, I could probably correct that just by tweaking the wrist a little bit. This handle, this pistol grip handle, and hung at a higher angle for dovetailing, gives me a lot more feel and control over the saw than I have with this handle that's in line with the cut, which really has 0 degrees of hang. And because the handle is round, it can kind of rotate in my hand. I don't have as much positive control as I have over a handle that fits in the hand only one way. And I've talked about this a lot before in my sawing videos about how the fit of the handle is probably the most important thing. So we got the tooth geometry right-ish. Certainly we need to address the set a little bit, but we can't change the handle. That's the major difference here, and these are automatically going to be more expensive because there's more labor involved. There's more stock involved. Good quality stock that's quarter sawn in order to get a handle like this. A lot of shaping, hardware that comes into play that's already going to just add to the overhead of the saw. It's going to make it more expensive. Is it worth that extra money? In my opinion, absolutely, because of the positive registration you get with this saw. This saw cannot rotate one way or another, whereas this saw could very easily spin one way or another. And if I was sawing in a particularly difficult wood with a wide open grain, it could actually drop into a grain line, and without you even knowing it, it could rotate and start following that line. Very minimal differences, but that could account for some of that saw wanting to pull one way or another. Now we have to recognize that I have most of my experience over the last 10 years has been with a saw like this. I'm used to this type of saw. If I worked more with this type of gent's handle, I would probably be able to compensate for that just by matter of experience. But if you're new into sawing and you're looking to have kind of the cards stacked in your favor, going with a pistol grip saw is going to give you a lot more control, and that was very evident as I was sawing here. So let's actually cut a joint now and kind of move beyond the warm-up. We feel like I've made several different saw cuts at this point. The body's fluid and warmed up. Well, let's actually start cutting joinery. When I'm sawing tails first, you'll notice, and this is with a lot, not just dovetails, I will often drop the saw down and focus on the face and then focus on bottoming out the cut. That's very typical, I find, with any joinery, being able to focus on one face rather than trying to saw both faces at the same time. So here I will start the cut across the end grain and ensure that I get that part square, because that's the most imperative part of this cut. This angle really doesn't matter, because whatever angle I saw, I'm going to end up transferring to the pin board. This saw definitely feels a little bit spongier than the other one. And a lot of that is very fine teeth. I really don't like dovetail saws with super fine teeth like this one. At 18 points per inch, it's really very, very spongy in the cut. That's why this bad axe saw is really my favorite at 15 points per inch. It cuts a lot faster, but it also clears sawdust a heck of a lot easier. This is not a chiseling video, so we're just going to saw this right along the baseline and skip the whole chiseling part. But let's go ahead and try to precisely saw out the half pins, or half tails I should say. A little bit difficult to start. Okay. And in this instance, I'm actually aiming to split the line. Pretty good. Not really a lot of chisel work that needs to be done there. I've got just a little bit where I didn't, the fret saw didn't intersect the line. So let me just quickly clean that up with a chisel. Now let's saw the pins. One thing I like about a saw is that not only will it start on the push stroke, but it starts decisively on the push stroke. Your greatest accuracy will come not from slowly starting a saw cut, but from really committing to it along the full length of the cut. You want to use the straightness of the saw plate to your advantage here. So anytime I'm using a saw, dovetail, tenon, whatever, I want that saw stroke, that starting cut, not only to be smooth to start, but smooth to start throughout the entire length so you can really commit to that cut. Let's go right on the line, if not purposely, maybe a little past it, just so we don't have to do any dovetail, any chisel cleanup here, just for sake of time. Call that a pretty good joint, and obviously you end up with some gaps down here at the bottom where I saw it past the baseline, but it's a good fitting joint. It's a friction fitting joint. The tails look good. They came together relatively quickly. I don't think we're going to find too much difference in the look and the appearance of the other saw, of the BearKat saw, but let's cut one anyway. There we go. There's the next dovetail. Again, I sawed more aggressively on the baseline, so the gaps are there. But it's a good fitting joint that taps together nicely, nice and firm. I can't really see anything wrong with it. So to me, these joints are about equal. So what do I actually learn from this? Well, that adage of a poor craftsman blames his tools is accurate as long as the tool is tuned properly. We see really good performance on dovetails and a hardwood using this $20 saw. The issue that I have with it is the set, and the set is a bit too wide and the set's a little inconsistent, which is causing those performance issues. But you can see when it came time to work to a line, I'd have to take this apart and reassemble it on the other side, but when it came time to actually work to a line, I was getting a really good quality joint, and a little bit of steering on my part was able to get this joint to come together cleanly and strongly. And anytime you have to hammer a joint together like that, it's a good fitting joint, especially with mechanical action like a dovetail. So for $20 and a little bit of know-how in sharpening, which frankly, if you watch Shawn's video, everything you need to know is right there. And since you only spent $20 on it, you don't really have to worry too much about screwing the whole thing up. So what am I getting when I go to a premium saw? Well, I'm getting the assurance that it is sharpened properly, that the tooth geometry is the best tooth geometry for the job at hand. I'm getting a handle that makes sawing so much easier. A handle that is well fit to your hand, and many of the boutique makers like BearKat, like Bad Axe, like Bontz saws, they will actually ask for a hand measurement so that you can get a really good handle fit. That is going to reduce the learning curve dramatically and allow you to produce a really good joint with a lot less effort. The things that you can't really show on video is the ease with which I was able to saw one joint or another. This saw feels easier to use. There's a much lighter grip. I feel like I have to grip the saw a little bit more to maintain control of it. But the other issues are things that really make these saws more expensive are, call them the bling factors, the beauty of the saws, but also the variety of geometries that you can get. This BearKat saw is really my half-blind dovetail saw. It's hung at such an angle that it's really designed to cut at a steep angle. In fact, if you paid real close attention, even though that video was sped up a little bit, this saw will stutter a little bit more as I'm trying to saw straight across the top of the wood. It saws better at this hang angle, much, much smoother. This Bontz saw has a slightly different hang angle and a different tooth geometry. This I find to be really the perfect saw for sawing very small, delicate dovetails like I would find in like a dovetailed box where I'm dealing with 3/8" thick material. It's perfectly good for that. My bad axe stiletto saw, this is my mainstay. This is a very aggressive saw, a nice long plate, more coarse tooth at 15 points per inch. It cuts very fast, but that aggressiveness, when you've got some sawing experience, can be a very good thing. You could blow through 9 drawers on a case really quickly with this very accurate saw. The hang is a little bit lower, allowing me to saw across the top of the board more accurately and more square, similar to what I was experiencing with this saw that has 0 degrees of hang angle. So in a lot of ways, despite this length and this pitch difference over this shorter length and much finer pitch, these two are actually more alike in their performance and how I would use them. But the problem you find with just about any dovetail saw that is of a lower price point is they all have very, very fine teeth, and you really don't have any say over the pitch of the saw that you're buying. It's pretty much all the same. They produce one saw, they stamp it out, and it has that peg tooth geometry with too fine of a pitch, in my opinion. So yes, you're paying for a saw that is sharpened, but you're also paying for customizable geometry that will truly make your sawing experience a heck of a lot better. Sawing with this Bad Axe dovetail saw is a night and day difference over sawing with this $20 saw. One would expect that to be the case because of the more than $200 price difference. But the quality of the results can be duplicated by manipulating the saw, by learning how to sharpen, by altering the tooth geometry. I would probably still end up replacing the handle because I do find you're going to get better results from a pistol grip handle than you will with a gent style handle. So, you know, the answer is yes. You can get good results from an inexpensive saw with a big ol' asterisk next to it as long as you have the know-how and the ability to sharpen it. Is it going to be the same experience? No, it's not going to be the same experience. You're going to find more control and precision using a boutique saw because of things like the fit of the handle and the ability to customize the geometry. But if you're just starting out and want to cut your first hand-cut dovetails, this is a great option. So I want to say thanks to Shawn for doing the heavy lifting on this and sending me this saw. And if you guys don't already know this, I do a live show, Renaissance Woodworker Live, every Wednesday evening around 5 p.m. Eastern. And in one of these episodes upcoming, I'm going to go ahead and give this saw away to somebody in the chat room. So if you don't make it to those live broadcasts, you might want to think about adding it on your schedule. Don't worry, when I decide to do it, I'll give plenty of notice that I'll be giving the saw away in this particular show. So hope to see you on the live stream. Make sure you check out Wortheffort, Shawn Graham's channel. He's got some great instruction over there, and he's really the perfect guy to talk to when it comes to getting started in woodworking with little to no budget, because he's got a lot of these type of experiments to show you how to take a $20 saw and turn it into something that can compete with the $245 saw.